Hello, I'm Rashad Salamat. This is Counting the Cost at Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, ruled as unlawful. Tariffs are at the heart of Donald Trump's economic agenda. After the Supreme Court struck down the main levies, new ones are now in place. But is Trump's trade strategy losing leverage? That legal constraint could reshape how the US wields economic power. So how would that affect trade negotiations and global rivalries? And could businesses and consumers pay the price? The Supreme Court may have removed one of Trump's trade weapons, but the shift towards protectionism and strategic competition continues. Does economic nationalism deliver, or does it simply redraw the global trade map? Tariffs, the most beautiful word in the dictionary, as Donald Trump says, or unlawful. The Supreme Court has ruled that the president cannot use emergency powers to impose them. It's a significant check on his power and a major setback to his second-term agenda. But despite the ruling, Trump has already found new ways to keep his trade barriers in place. Tariffs remain central to his economic policy to boost American manufacturing and generate revenue. The court may have disarmed one of Trump's trade weapons, but the turn towards protectionism is far from over. And with as much as $175 billion in disputed duties hanging in the balance, do protectionist walls build American industry or just raise prices for everyone else? Fintan Monahan reports.
To me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff, and it's my favorite word.
They have tremendous tariffs that they're paying to the United States of America.
I stopped the war just today through the use of tariffs.
Without the tariffs, our nation would be imperiled.
U.S. President Donald Trump has made no secret of his love for tariffs. But now the Supreme Court has delivered a stunning setback to his agenda. Sweeping tariffs imposed by Trump using emergency powers were declared unlawful. Among those backing the ruling were justices appointed by Trump himself.
The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court. Absolutely ashamed. If you look at that...
Tariffs have been the cornerstone of Trump's economic policy. In April last year, he imposed them on nearly every country in the world. But despite the Supreme Court ruling, Trump was quick to reimpose new tariffs using different legislation.
A global tariff under Section 122, over and above our normal tariffs already being charged. And we're also initiating several Section 301 and other investigations to protect our country from unfair trading practices of other countries and companies.
But the replacement measures have a time limit. They're only good for 150 days. After that, Congress needs to agree to extend them. Trump initially justified tariffs as necessary to balance long-standing trade deficits with global partners. But he later expanded their use as he pursued other policy goals. Tariffs on Mexico and Canada were partly justified as a move to pressure those countries to do more to stop the flow of undocumented migrants and illegal drugs across the border. They've even been used to end conflicts. When tension flared between India and Pakistan in May 2025, Trump says he used tariffs to convince both sides to come to the negotiating table. Critics see tariffs as American economic power being used to force concessions. Over the past year, the U.S. was able to use the threat of tariffs to reach favorable deals with many key trading partners. But that leverage is now in doubt, and so too is the future of many of those deals. In his State of the Union address, the president said he was confident that the agreements would hold. Trump's economic agenda relies heavily on tariffs. He wants to use them to revitalize American industry, reduce foreign imports, and generate new revenue for the Treasury. But questions over the future of his signature policy have now put that agenda on an increasingly shaky footing. Fintan Monahan, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
So what do we mean when we talk about protectionism? Protectionist measures are used to boost or defend domestic industries. This includes tariffs, but also other measures that make foreign imports less competitive. In the US, the Trump administration made America First its flagship policy. In its first term, it withdrew from trade deals, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the North American Free Trade Agreement. It also became embroiled in a trade war with China. But the Democrats also embraced protectionism. The Biden administration didn't reverse Trump's core trade initiatives. It also launched generous subsidy schemes to boost American manufacturing. But the US is far from the only nation with protectionist policies. According to the World Trade Organization, China had an average tariff of around about 7% in 2024. And India had an average tariff of 17%, one of the highest among major global economies. Well, to discuss all this, and joining us from Los Angeles is William Lee. He is the chief economist and managing director at Global Economic Advisors. From Washington, we have Harry Broadman. He's the former chief of staff of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. And from London, it's Philippe Leguin. He is a political economist and senior visiting fellow at the London School of Economics European Institute and former special advisor to the Director General of the World Trade Organization. Thank you all for joining me. The basic question to start with is, and I want all of you to answer it, and that's first of all to William, how does this change the whole set of guiding principles which are fundamental to Donald Trump's economic agenda?
The Supreme Court ruling actually did not change things fundamentally. It took away the legal basis by which he was able to apply tariffs across the board using the Emergency Economic Powers Act. But the principle that he's put in place, which is to really been misunderstood, his use of tariffs is really not so much to protect American industries, but rather to incentivize and redirect investment into key sectors of the U.S. economy. The U.S. running a huge balance payments deficit means that there's a lot of capital flowing into this country. And what Donald Trump is using tariffs to do is to say, look, you make a deal with us and put jobs into the country, put investments and build factories in our country, and in turn, I'll give you a low tariff. But if you insist on competing with our producers and produce stuff abroad and bring them into the United States, then you're going to face a tariff barrier because we want to protect those who invest in our country from unfair competition. That's the basic principle, and that stays. The Supreme Court essentially has caused Donald Trump now to shift the basis of a new set of tariffs to be much more bilateral and much more sectoral. But nevertheless, the principle is invest in the United States, be a partner with the United States, and you get low tariffs. Otherwise, face a large tariff barrier.
Harry.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. As a former trade negotiator, I'm used to seeing some bit of turbulence in the policy sphere between the White House, Capitol Hill, and the courts. In this particular case, I think there was a horribly wrong strategic move by those who are advising Mr. Trump as to what instrument to use to put more of his beloved instrument of tariffs on the books. Using IEEPA was strange to those of us who know trade law quite well. I know this is a bit arcane for most viewers, but I think when you see the President of the United States using the wrong law to try to impose his penalties, you got to wonder what's going on within the Oval Office. Now, he's put in place a different set of tariffs that are legal, but they only last for 150 days. I don't think they should last even that long. But for Mr. Trump, this is a setback, and frankly, it shows the rest of the world that the U.S., at least under this president, is practicing an amateur trade policy.
Philippe.
Well, I mean, Trump likes to call himself a tariff man and even king, but it turns out that he's not an absolute monarch when it comes to commerce, after all. I think the Supreme Court ruling is a big step back in terms of Trump's trade strategy. It throws it into chaos. It throws into question the deal that he's made with the EU and indeed with many other countries. I think it deprives him of his preferred form of geopolitical leverage, of threatening huge instant tariffs in a bid to get concessions on all sorts of matters. And it will give him less flexibility going forward in terms of how he implements his trade policy. At the same time, I don't think it in any way compromises his ability to turn America protectionist, to pursue American first policies. And indeed, he has many other forms of leverage beyond those of simply the emergency power tariffs of which he's been deprived. So I think the big picture is that there's going to be much more uncertainty in the short term, but in terms of where we're headed economically, at least, I think that there's no change of course.
Well, indeed, let's have a look at all that. So the big question is, what were Trump's tariffs supposed to achieve and how effective have they been? Well, let's start with the trade deficit. At the end of 2024, this stood at $903.5 billion. In 2025, it went down not by much, a little over $2 billion, 0.2% drop there. Tariffs were supposed to encourage industry to move back to America, but just 181,000 new jobs were added, actually, in 2025. Economic growth, well, it also dipped. It was 2.2% last year. Compare that with 2.4% the year before. Finally, let's have a look at the money taken in by the tariffs. In August, the US Treasury Secretary said he expected around about $500 billion. But by the end of the year, this ended up being a lot less, around about $200 billion. This money is set to be used to reduce the more than $38 trillion national debt. But remember, it isn't being collected from other countries. It's being paid for by US importers, who often pass on the cost to the consumer. So, William, with that in mind, and also that the US economy lost 108,000 manufacturing jobs last year, doesn't really show the efficacy of this policy, surely.
Well, Rich, surely you have to realize that the so-called loss of jobs is a slowdown in job creation that's due to high productivity. The U.S. growth rate actually is very high. The number that you showed there, 2.2, doesn't take into account the fact that the private sector actually grew much faster because there was a 2 percentage point drop in the fourth quarter due to the government shutdown. So when you take into account actually what has been going on in the U.S. economy has been thriving very, very well in terms of high growth. Inflation's coming down. Inflation is 2.75%, and the tariff, the terrible inflation due to tariffs was about half a percentage point, according to the estimates by the Federal Reserve that Chair Powell had talked about. So I really don't believe that you're characterizing the U.S. economy correctly. The U.S. economy is doing quite well, and in terms of the balance of payments, as I said earlier, when you have a large balance of payments deficit, that's due to the amount of savings the United States does, not due to tariff policy. What the tariff policy is trying to do is redirect where the surpluses are and where the deficits are in what countries they are. And what he's trying to say is be a partner in the United States and you have a tremendous access to our marketplace, be a competitor and you'll face a tariff. So what he's doing is reshaping the trade routes. He's reshaping the supply lines in a way to secure it from the dominance of monopolies around the world. So I believe actually that the tariff policy is working well and is working to benefit the United States, and the results are showing up, despite the fact that the aggregate numbers have had different government shutdowns and other things distorting it.
Philippe, would you go along with that?
Well, I think the US economy is doing well despite Donald Trump, not thanks to him. It's mostly due to an absolutely massive boom in artificial intelligence, which may or may not be a bubble, but that is what is stimulating the economy. Insofar as the tariffs themselves, they've had a negative effect. They have pushed up prices less than had if they'd been implemented in full, but they have, and they have slowed the growth of the economy without creating new manufacturing jobs, as was the promise that Trump made. So I think you need to distinguish very carefully between the boom, which has nothing to do with trade, and the impact of Donald Trump's trade policies, which is negative for the United States.
And does it feel as though it's a prosperous country, Harry?
It feels like it's a very uncertain country at this juncture. There's a lot of nervousness among investors, among businesses, among consumers and workers. And, someone who sat on the Council of Economic Advisors, prior to becoming assistant U.S. trade negotiator, I'm really surprised to hear that people believe that the uncertainty engendered by Mr. Trump's trade policy is going to continue to boost growth. Yes, as everyone has said, it's in spite of what he's doing. It would be really great to have a president who showed economic leadership, who understands how markets work, who understands how investments work, and frankly, who understands how to negotiate international trade deals and investment deals. Mr. Trump thrives himself on being a great negotiator, but I think the data suggests that he's not up to snuff as to what he thinks he is.
Philippe, without a doubt, 2025 was a special year, not least because one measure of policy uncertainty, going to Harry's point, the St. Louis Fed's Economic Policy Uncertainty Index, peaked at a reading of 460 after never having surpassed 250 outside of COVID. Now, what does that tell us if we do have that policy uncertainty? How does that play out in the economy?
Well, I would hate to be a business having to make long-term investment decisions when the basis on which you make those decisions can change overnight. A crazy tweet from Donald Trump at 3 a.m., which is then reversed days, weeks, months later or not implemented. I think it must be incredibly difficult to run a business with that kind of uncertainty. And of course, looking beyond the United States, if you are a partner of the US and you're trying to say, okay, there's been a change in American policy, there is a shift towards protectionism, how do we want to engage with this? Well, again, if the policy is forever changing and you don't know what could happen this day or next, how on earth are you meant to engage with that and plan for the future? So my advice would be actually far from attracting increased investment to the United States, as William Lee seems to say. Actually, the only way that you could insulate yourself from this uncertainty is to disengage from the United States and indeed to diversify your economic relations. And that's what I advise the EU and indeed other countries to do.
William, how would you feel about that? And also, how do you feel about that uncertainty also feeding through to what is really a story of dollar debasement at the moment?
Well, when I talk to investors, one of the things that they tell me is the reason why they come to the United States is because this is where capital is most productive. And the reason why we're seeing this investment boom right now is because the changes in tax policies and the tax write-offs that are allowed for businesses that invest in the United States has really jumped because of the legislation that Donald Trump has just passed. And so those are the environment of reducing regulation, reducing taxes, reducing the size of government are the reasons why companies are coming to the United States. And to take a little jab at Philippe for a moment, the reason why they don't go to Europe is because there's exactly opposite happening there. The government is getting larger, regulations are getting more onerous, and taxes are continuing to be high. So we have a choice that people have. Come here where your capital is most productive. And regarding your comment about dollar dominance and decline, the dollar has been at the highest level when Donald Trump came into office, and it was overvalued. So everyone, traders that I talked to, had anticipated the dollar to be coming down from their extraordinarily high levels. But right now, most people consider it at near equilibrium. So I think the world actually is voting with dollars to coming into the United States, and we'll have policy stabilized once we have a track record of success. And so far, we're generating that track record of success in terms of high returns for investments into the United States.
So, Harry, are tariffs fundamentally then a negotiating tactic or a long-term economic policy? And if that the rug is pulled from under him, what does Donald Trump use in the future to bend countries to his own will?
Well, maybe he should think about how to, put together a coherent negotiating program rather than trying to bully other countries. If you look across the world, most of the countries who are able to garner significant investment in the most useful ways have decent economic policies and have, really good spokespersons at the very top. Again, per our conversation now, the United States economy is doing as well as it is despite what is going on in the White House and despite the economic uncertainty. And this is a very corrosive matter. And so focusing on what is happening today and not focusing on what this means as to money or money not in the bank going 6 months, a year down the road, I think that's a bit of a myopic view about how to think about the U.S. economy. Again, it's a great economy. It's a sizable economy, a lot of opportunity here, but there's a gray cloud over it, and the cloud keeps getting bigger and maybe even grayer.
William, you've got a situation now that before this ruling, you had allies such as, let's say, Britain, who paid very low taxes compared to others and now they face much higher export prices, if you will, than they did before. And economic rivals such as China, well, they face lower barriers. Now, how do you respond to that?
Well, this kerfuffle from the Supreme Court has generated these distortions where right now China has a higher level of tariffs on us than we have on them because of the ruling. Now, I think going longer term, I think allies like UK found that the bilateral deal they struck with us exactly fits the principle I talked about. Be a partner and you have zero tariffs. Rolls-Royce engines come into the United States with zero tariffs because Boeing aircraft go to the UK. And that kind of bilateralism is exactly the kind of deal that every country is wanting to strike. And recall that the US MCA agreement allows Canada and Mexico to export, well, Canada in particular, 70% of its exports coming to the United States without any tariffs. So I think the situation is set up where if you partner with the United States and invest in the United States, you're guaranteed to have market access to a huge marketplace to sell your products at a low tariff price. And that uncertainty you keep talking about is a result of disturbances from the ruling of the Supreme Court, which will be ratified or changed over the next 150 days, which gives the administration the opportunity to reshape the tariffs. But nevertheless, the principle is partner with us and you get low tariffs and a market access.
Philip, you were nodding your head in disagreement. Tell us why.
Yeah, I think if only that were true. I mean, yeah, I'm based in London, and the UK government has done more than perhaps any other country on earth in order to partner with the United States. And according to William, that would guarantee market access. And instead, what you've seen is Donald Trump threaten punitive tariffs against the UK because it supported Denmark in wanting to maintain its sovereignty over Greenland, then rescinded. And now it faces the same tariff as indeed does China or Brazil and all these countries, which I don't think William would think are close partners of the United States. So it's complete nonsense, whether it is due to Donald Trump himself or indeed due to the legal basis on which he imposed these tariffs. There is no certain market access, even for the closest partners. And I think even Donald Trump himself would say that the UK is, perhaps the US's closest partner.
Harry, but, the longer-term game here, we've had the German Chancellor visit, we've had the British Prime Minister visit, and other global leaders also visit Beijing of late. Now, is this, in a way, perhaps pushing some of America's allies into the arms of China?
Perhaps. I mean, the issue is that for China, the U.S. is really the body that China really wants to have a deep relationship with. And as important as Germany and the U.K. are, and I'm not speaking as an arrogant American, I'm just speaking as a good economist who understands how these things work. America is still, a very important and attractive economy, and most countries want to have foreign investment and trade with the United States. But I think to characterize that in our country that the Supreme Court cut off Mr. Trump is really, I'm not sure who is drinking what, but the issue is that the court made a ruling based upon a very poor policy choice by Trump. And I think understanding that and understanding what the leader of the United States is doing to try to anchor and steer the economy really frightens a lot of investors across the globe, and not just from a macro financial investment, but from a real economy investment. Listen, I think the U.S. is a great economy, but right now we've got a very dark cloud, as I said, over us.
William, we haven't got very much time. Please keep it short. Will the tariffs continue in a different guise, if you will, under a different legal framework? And do you expect them to be instituted soon?
It's without a doubt that tariffs will stay with us because the government has found a different revenue source. I would say that if the government were able to contain its expenditures and lower the spending, then we wouldn't need a new base for tariffs. But now that they found a new base, the question is, do you want to incentivize people to buy American and buy less foreign products, or do you want to disincentivize them from working? Because income taxes disincentivize people from working, and that's the last thing you want to do to revive this economy and to keep it strong. So I think the basis of revenues using tariffs is here to stay, and no administration coming in the future is going to want to change that.
Harry, with that all in mind, do you think that these importers will seek refunds? And if they do manage to get some of the refunds from that $170 billion odd, should they then also be perhaps compensating the people who are buying their goods because they passed on the cost to them? Very quickly.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, yes, everybody's going to try to get refunds, and this is going to be a full-time employment policy for Mr. Trump to figure out how to navigate these payments back to those who made them.
Philippe, so tariffs in other guises, if you will, is protectionism here to stay?
Yes, I think it is. I think Trump's protectionist impulses haven't gone. If anything, I'd see an increase in protectionism as a result of the Supreme Court ruling. He's launched this whole bevy of new sectoral investigations into all sorts of different sectors where previous evidence shows that he had imposed high tariffs. Now, whether this is as leverage and they can be cut for favored countries, or whether they are high globally, I think, yes, the direction is set. We're heading to increased protectionism.
William, very quickly, is protectionism here to stay?
Yes, absolutely. Tariffs are here to stay because they're an incentive to get more investments in the sectors we want, and it's a revenue source for the government. So there's no question tariffs are going to be here to stay.
Harry, are they here to stay, or could the midterms change it?
The midterms are very important. I don't think they can change. Well, at least right now we've got the 150 days, so the tariffs will stay there. But I think what will change is when the business community in the United States and the consumers and the workers, make their case to Mr. Trump to the extent that he will listen. But this is the problem. He doesn't listen.
Harry Broadman, Philippe Legrand, and William Lee, thank you so much for joining us. And that's our show for this week. Get in touch with us on X. I'm at Rashad TV, and do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do so, or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. But there's more definitely for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. Well, that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Rashad Salamat from the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for joining us. The news continues on Al Jazeera next.